So, yes, good morning, everybody. York City walls coming back to York for the third time, or maybe the fourth time. So I'm going to divide this. I've put it into two at the moment, but I'm suggesting I'm going to put it into three parts this because it is quite a hefty walk round. And I've just looked at a couple of things laterally as well, and I've got some video in here as well. They run for 2.2 miles, but actually the built wall itself is only about 2 miles long. The other bits account for the King's Pool, where the River Foss comes in, where there's no wall, and there's bits of wall in other places as well, which have been demolished or were never built at one time. So that's the classic view of from the walls of the Minster that's on every sort of postcard and book on York itself. Funnily enough, this is really enough the very end of what I'm going to do. I'm going to set off in the Multangular Tower and work my way around clockwise, ending back up in the museum gardens. But really a bit about the history of the wall and how it came about. And obviously the Romans crossed from Lincoln coming off to Brough and founded York in AD 71 at the confluence of the rivers Ouse and the River Foss. And they wanted to obviously secure the premises, so they built a wooden, a mud embankment around it. So that was really AD 71 to AD 74. So when the 9th Legion moved in here, so they probably made it to a standard Roman fort plan. So there's really 4 entrances into it. This mud embankment or rampart stood probably about 8 feet high. But then around AD 100, they started putting a stone wall on top of that. So probably the earliest part of it will be the Multangular Tower in Museum Gardens. And they continued building the wall over a 200-year period. So it was really completed by the year 300, when Constantine was emperor and living in York at the time. And you could say that wall stands about 16 feet high. So with the earth embankment underneath that, the rampart, it stands about 24 feet high. Some parts are higher than others, as we'll see as we go around. And so they had 4 entrances. We only use one of those today. Bootham Bar was the site of a Roman entrance. There was another entrance just beyond, just before Monk Bar, and that sort of ran behind the Minster. There's another entrance that was on where King's Square is today, where the Chocolate Museum is, at the top of the shambles and where performances take place around there. And the other one was down by where the Mansion House is and the Guildhall is today. So they're really the 4 entrances into it and created the principal streets across the fortress. And you can say the wall they built was all of magnesium limestones, or magnesian limestone. So that came across from Tadcaster, coming down the wharf and then up the Ouse. And that's where everything came from to build York during the Roman period. So they created the wall around it, and it had an outer ditch, and that was around about sort of 60 feet wide and then about 10 feet deep. In places, because they've got the sort of the north side of the wall, the northwest side, it could be flooded from using the waters from the River Foss. It was a lot smaller than the wall is today. It covered about 50 acres. So I sort of gave that sort of the perimeter of that from telling you where the gates came in that they had. There was a gap between where the Guildhall stands and the river. That was probably for unloading goods onto there as well, and also gave a bit of ground so invaders were coming up, they could actually fire down on them. And so there's always, it never really ran right up to the river. And so they left around about 410 AD, the Romans did, going back due to attacks in Rome itself. And because when we came into this period, really from the 5th century onwards to about the 9th, 10th century, talking about, is that really not much happened with the walls at all. They were probably plundered for stone in places, and because they still, the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings still retained those around it. And because it was probably broken through as well when the Vikings came in AD 866 as well. So really nothing happened because they didn't really build in stone at that time. So they really used what was there already. But the great change came in 1066 after the Battle of Hastings. And it was the Normans that built the much larger wall that goes around the city today. Because it was William the Conqueror came up in the winter of 1069. This was part of the harrying of the north. He'd stayed in Selby, just south of York, and came up here, and he decreed that it should be much better defended, York, being the northern capital. So it was him who built the castle and then ordered the walls to be built or to be heightened or rebuilt. And it was him, looking at this map round here, where the River Foss comes in. He said that the wall shouldn't go across there, and it would be the King's Pool. So that's where it got its name from, really from William the Conqueror saying that it should be a fishing pool in there. Before that, it was marshy ground. So he ordered it to be dammed, and then because it flooded that area, and because it was used as a fish pond, only for certain people, of course, who had the right to fish in it. Normally some of these monks and other people are around there. And really the walls as we know it today was started built around about 1221, and this was in the time of Henry III. He gave £190 for the repair of the walls and strengthening of them, and he also gave the city the right to raise a tax called mortgage, and this was taxed on people coming in and out of a city to sell goods, and that tax could only be used for rebuilding and repair of the walls. And I think it went through to about the 19th century. So people who lived in some of the bar towers, the rent that they paid to live in there went towards the repair of the walls. And again, they were strengthened again after 1319. This is when the Scottish started to attack after the success that they had at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1316. So what we see there were the bar gates really being rebuilt and strengthened. They had barbicans, these long entrance tunnels on the front of them built at that time. So the only one with a barbican today is Walgate. There's one we're not seeing today, but we'll see that next week. And like I say, a lot of people, there's this great threat from the Scots. Some of the York citizens and certainly the Lord Mayor took place in the Battle of Myton, which took place about 20 miles north of here. And the Lord Mayor of York was killed, and a lot of other people were as well, about 3,000 citizens and other people had joined forces to protect really the city from this Scottish incursion. But the Scots didn't want to take land, they all only really wanted to take property. So they were sort of driving cows and cattle and anything portable they could take back to Scotland. But like I say, that led to the defence of the city round here, really as we see it today. Then I'm going to skip quite a few hundred years to really Victorian times, because we'll see that most of the wall today was rebuilt by the Victorians. This really set off from 1798, is that the Corporation of York wanted to demolish the whole of the walls, largely because other cities had done this, especially London. And that's why there's no wall down there, because they demolished it at this time. York wanted to demolish it, but there's such a great outcry, really led by a chap called William Etty. He was the artist who painted nudes, and that put them off destroying a lot of the walls, but some of it was taken down during that period, as we see as we go round. The rebuilding, so you could walk around the walls. Really, that started it in sort of 1888, 1887 period like that, because they rebuilt it. They put arches to support the walkway around it, really, and they built the steps up by the side of Bootham Bar, as we'll see today. Because a lot of that had to be restored because of the Civil War in 1644. York came under siege, and although they never got into the city, largely because, as we'll see round the exhibition square of the art gallery, is that the Abbey, St Mary's Abbey in Museum Gardens, had its own wall around it. So the parliamentarian attackers had to get over that wall first and then attack the actual city wall itself. So they could attack it with cannons and things like that, but they never got over the top of it. So there was quite a lot of destruction made in 1644, and like I say, the city walls were repaired. Royalists had to pay £5,000 for the repair of that wall, and it really included a rebuilding of the Barbican out at Wormgate, and the other which was badly attacked was Bootham Bar as well. And so really that's how the walls come to be today, and they continued to be repaired as well. So this is Wormgate Bar in 2015. That was repaired, and you can say the wall of the Barbican opened up. There's a cafe inside there, and you can actually sit outside there on the wall of the Barbican and look down to the entrance tunnel, also called a killing field as well, for the attackers who got as far as there. You can also sit right up on the roof as well. So it's constantly being repaired, and I think a bit of wall between Bootham and Monk Bar, that was repaired in 2014, 13 or something like that, because I tried to go around it, but they were repairing a section of it round there. So it's constantly being repaired. So continuing on, this is the section I'm going to look at first from Museum Gardens down here, where we're going to start off at the Multangular Tower and then go behind the Multangular Tower next door to the King's Manor into Exhibition Square, up onto the walls at Bootham Bar, and go round as far as Monk Bar. Then the second section I look at today would be from Monk Bar really to the River Foss, and we'll end there today. So let's have a quick look on going on here. It's about a 10-15 minute walk from the Multangular Tower around to Monk Bar, and from Monk Bar to the sort of River Foss here, that's about 5 or 6 minutes walk in total. But I'll be looking at other things and a bit about what happened and the reasoning behind them and what's missing and things like that. But we're starting here because this is the oldest part of the Roman part of the fortress, and say this was sort of built around 100 AD, 29 years after the Romans founded York, and it stands about 17 foot high. So we'll look at this bottom part of it here, because they're made out of magnesium limestone, and say the upper part there, and about another 13 foot was added by the Normans in the sort of 13th century above there. And they're the people who added the arrow slits up there. The red band coming around here, that's tile, and like I say, would be made locally because of because York sits on clay, and they put that in. There's really sort of 2 or 3 courses of that. They built the skirt of it, it just bends out a bit at the bottom, and then to level the wall off to build above that, that's why they got this built band of red tile in there. So it's a way of sort of stopping and then securing the wall and then building it up again. It's thought that the Roman tower stood probably a little higher than this, and it either had a conical roof on top of it or it had a flat roof across it. Nobody really knows why. But you can go round here, and I'm not sure whether we can do this at the moment, because last year the area behind the Multangular Tower was closed off. So what I'm picturing today was taken in 2017. But you can follow the path round to the back of the Multangular Tower, and there's normally a gate in the wall there that's open to access the back. The first time I went in 2018, I had to access it going round to the library, this red brick building there, and go through the gate there by St Leonard's Hospice and come into this area. But I just say, when I came back earlier this year, the gate behind here that leads down the side of King's Manor, that was locked as well. That might have been temporarily because they had scaffolding work on the King's Manor down that passage, but I'll show you that as well. But you can go behind here, and what you can see here is the inside of the wall, and you can say again that red line very clear there of the tiles going around it. And you can say this is the arches, because that's built during the Norman period as well. And you'll see this this sort of wall propping up the wall, largely because in 1831 this was actually all soil in here, because that's the way that the Romans secured the wall even more, is that they had this embankment behind it. And in 1831, they dug that soil out to look at the Roman foundations of it. And that's what really can see today. So that's really propping up that wall. These coffins down here, they are Roman Roman coffins, but not from this area, but they are from York itself. Oddly, they're not of magnesium limestone, but these are of harder millstone grit, so they come from somewhere else down here. So there's 5 of those in there. And so the wall here later on in the Norman times acted as 2 walls as well, because I'm stood in here in the precinct of St Leonard's Hospice. That was founded in 937 by King Athelstan, then rebuilt after a fire around about 1120. I'm not showing that today because I've shown it on a previous one, but that stands behind me there, the hospital of that. So the wall round here was that. On the other side, it acted as a wall for St Mary's Abbey, because they had their own wall around it. And that's what stretches onto Marygate beyond the Abbey ruins as well. So that went all the way around this area. So that's what we'll see when we come into Exhibition Square as well. Moving down here to the right, we can follow the wall down. And I say this is where it was uncovered again in 1831, where they dug out all the soil. And surprisingly, they found this tower here. It's called the Anglian Tower. I think it was built between 500 and 700 AD, post-Roman period. Other people argue that it might well have been a Roman tower itself, propping up the wall again here. So the Anglians don't normally ever build in stone. So if it is Anglian, it's very unusual. It's just a square tower, like I say, wasn't seen until they dug this area out. So you can see where they dug down from, this line of stonework up here. So because they'd only seen a part of the top of that tower, somebody wanted to build some stables over the top of it. And when they're digging down for the foundations, actually found the tops of these stones. And that's how it came to be dug out in 1831. It's worth continuing down here to the dead end, because behind there, you can see how the wall was built over the sort of over the centuries. So here we've got the Roman bank, then because they built up slightly higher again in the Anglian and Viking period. Then the original Norman bank here, like I said, was raised post 1069 when William the Conqueror came in, and then the one built properly from 1221, 1222 onwards, a lot higher as well. So it gives you an idea of how it's been built up over 1,000+ years around there. I'm going now to the other side of the wall here, to the left side, down to the passage that goes down to the King's Manor. So just a little bit about that. I've got a bit of film at the end of this section, so you'll see the wall and things like that, and I put a bit of commentary on it as well. So I might just repeat a bit of what is said on that commentary, but you'll get to see the wall and its extent and the passages and things like that, and a bit about the King's Manor as well, because this was built as the house to the abbot of St Mary's Abbey, and then sort of extended over the years. But obviously they were abolished in 1539, and then it fell into the hands of the king, and he established the Parliament of the North, because it's probably a demand people are wanting to make today, and because that's where they ruled, they undertook what the king wanted in the north, so people got well paid for being involved in that. So it was normally the great landowners who were involved in that, in doing the king's wishes in the north. So the Council of the North existed between 1536 and 1641. And this was used as a sort of the residence and for the meetings of the Council of the North. And that's why we got the royal coat of arms on the front here. And they're the coat of arms of Charles I. So we'll see that on that. And coming into Exhibition Square, we've got the art gallery here. That was built for an industrial exhibition and fine art in 1879. The statue here is to William Etty, who I mentioned before. He was an artist who was born in York, and he was responsible for some quite fruity nudes at the time. So it's quite unusual that his statue stands in front of the art gallery, because it was well frowned upon at the time. But he was really the leading light in the campaign to restore the walls, not to have them demolished. And if you look at his feet, you can't see it very well on this photograph, I need to climb into the fountain really, but there is a representation of Bootham Bar there. He's actually standing nearly facing Bootham Bar, because really that's the first part of the bars that the Victorians started to repair around there. So he's stood there in front of the art gallery. He's in one of these roundels as well, where I mentioned before, there's people like John Carvey, eminent architect in there, and other artists. So very important that William Etty is being pulled out of that for that reason, and not due to his painting of the nudes or anything like that, which you might suspect, but that's why he stood in the front there. He's also facing across to the De Grey rooms here as well. They were built in 1842, but this is where the first part of the wall was demolished. It came across here, across St. Leonard's Place, and that part, about 70 foot of wall, was demolished at that time to open up that road to come through here, because it was seen as sort of hindering development. So that's why the De Grey rooms was built there at that time. And also within here, you can see the edge of the St. Mary's Abbey wall as well. So that really came in and abutted the city wall itself. That's why when the parliamentarian soldiers got over St. Mary's Abbey wall, they were contained or confined in this space. And obviously the advantage that the royalists had in the city was firing down on those people down there. And really, it was from St. Mary's Abbey that the Bargate here, Bootham, takes its name. It really means at the booths, because the St. Mary's Abbey had a weekly market in this area, and stalls were called booths in those days as well. And so that's how it got its name that we use today. And like I say, before that, the Romans called it Galmanlith as the area around there. So you could say that during the sort of Civil War, the sieges, that York was never attacked, largely because of St. Mary's Wall, keeping the parliamentarians back. So let's look at Bootham Bar, the first part of the first bar gate we're looking at, because this is where the Romans use this as well. There's nothing to see of the Roman period because that's underneath here. So it's really the foundations for Bootham Bar that we see today. So the oldest part of it is this central arch here, where the traffic goes through to High Petergate beyond, largely because it was rebuilt again, or built on top of, round about 1300. So we've got this upper story there. And what we're seeing right at the top there, these sort of roundels coming off there, are much later as well. They were probably added in after the Civil War, because most of this Bargate was blown to pieces. And so they rebuilt it in that way as well. The figures on top, they were, it said in medieval times, the three great saints of St. Wilfrid of Ripon, St. John of Beverley, and St. William of York. So they're sort of the three saints for the cathedrals associated with Yorkshire. Today, these were created in 1894. I'll just have to see what the name of the chap is who created them. George Milburn, he sculpted those in 1894. So this is really when it was all being recreated around here. So we've got the Stuart coat of arms in the middle up there, and we've also got the shields, the coats of arms of York below that. Because it had a barbican that came out the front, but that was dismantled in 1832, largely because it's hindering the larger traffic that was coming through them. Stagecoaches wouldn't have had difficulty getting through here. They had to go down that barbican to get in. Wagons were getting larger, and obviously we had the advent just at that period of coming on later in the century for cars and other wagons and things like that. So really the walls were saved due to the campaign by William Etty, and then they were seen as a tourist attraction towards the end of the Victorian period, and it attracted people to come to York. They were coming in on the train, from the 1830s, but they couldn't get onto the wall at all because there was no footpath round them. And so it was really in the 1890s that they devised is that the walls would actually, better than knocking them down, would actually be a tourist attraction. So again, this is why this stone walkway up onto the wall was built in the 1890s in order for visitors to access it. It wasn't there before because it would have helped any attacker get up and into the Barbican, into the bar gate itself. So that's what, and because these tunnels here were built at the same time as well for pedestrian access because of the narrowness of the entrance into it. So let's have a quick look at another part of that. That's it from the rear. I'm sorry about it being slightly darker here. But normally the fronts of them were just gates. They were all for show, really, to show strength and power. And quite often behind them, they weren't actually properly built. So quite often they were wooden structures which were supporting that there were rooms in them and things like that. They weren't just sort of bits of wood propped up, holding the front up. But they didn't spend a great deal of money on the back, largely because people wouldn't attack it from the rear. So it was sort of for reasons of expense. And we'll see when we come to Warmgate Bar, that's got like a wooden building attached to it, but that's Elizabethan. But like I say, these were sort of tend to be rebuilt in stone and rebuilt again. This rear to Bootham Bar actually dates from about 1723, so it's been rebuilt even in, like I say, modern times compared to how old it is looking on there. And then this is one of the bars that you can actually go inside of without paying, because the Monk Bar is the Richard III Museum, as we'll see. The Warmgate Bar is a cafe, and I recommend going in there just to have a cup of coffee. But because there's all sorts of access you get in there, but you won't get in Monk Bar. And Micklegate Bar, that's as a museum about the walls of York itself and other things owned by the York Museum Trust. Those other two museums are around there. So here you can see the great Portcullis. That weighs about 2 tons. You can see the groove that it was dropped in, so that was to stop attackers getting in. Had metal spikes on the bottom, and then behind that, the great doors of the gateway would be closed as well. So it was like a double defense mechanism before people could get in. It was on a sort of a capstan type thing, but it was raised and lowered up there, because quite often these were used for other things after they sort of the protective nature of the bars came. People lived in them, and some came shops and some came jails and other things like that. So that's where Bootham Bar is really big free one that you can walk through up onto the walls, because this is where you can come up to in 1888, 1898 period to walk along here. So this is all a Victorian recreation along here, and not quite what it would have looked like, because some of the things that they've done an even wall along here, and there isn't if you were shooting arrows from here, it would be impossible to get a 180-degree look around them from how they've done it. And because they've built up the walkway here as well. This is supported on arches underneath in order to give that sort of distance. So it's about 6 foot wide up here. I'm going to say standing about 24 feet up here. I'm going to say on here, it's still following the Roman wall around here. The Roman wall is buried in support of this later wall, because they're dating from 1220s onwards around here. It also follows Gillygate along here, takes its name from St Giles Church that stood along there. And because there's not much to see over this side, because these houses were built, shops and houses and pubs are built right up to the wall, or they've got little sort of yards behind them. And that was quite normal even during the medieval period. It was lined with wooden houses along there because it gave an added level of protection for attackers. They had to get through those houses to get at the wall. So when they came in, the parliamentarian soldiers attacked in 1644, they burnt all the houses of Gillygate down in order to get anywhere near the wall itself. And so that sort of still stands today. So there's not much of a view over here. Over here, you're looking across Dean's Park and into the Minster area. And the first turning we come to is the Robin Hood Tower. So this had fallen down round about 1680 and wasn't really a tower left there at all. So that tower's a complete rebuilding of 1887 to 1889. And from there, it looks down onto the dry moat today, which follows Lord Mayor's Walk along there, the road that runs on the side. You can say that was fully created around about 1700. And that used to be a flooded, so it would have been a wet moat, and water from the River Foss, from a sluice, I guess, would allow the water to make that into an impassable moat, of coming right up to the walls as well. So a few things you can see in Dean's Park, because this was the site of the Archbishop's Palace of York before it went down to Bishopthorpe. And I'm going to say this was in about 1241. And the only remaining part of that, there's some arcades just before it, is the former chapel of the Archbishop's residence, because they standing really enough behind the chapter house of the Minster. And that forms the Minster Library today from about 810. So as we're walking along behind here on the walls, there's a plaque to say, which I showed at the beginning, to say the Victorians repaired it. And you can say this is where you can see the moat which runs alongside Lord Mayor's Parade, because they best seen in the spring when the daffodils are out. Because it's repaired all the time, the wall is around here. On the other side, we come behind to the treasurer's house, because that was, as it's implied, was where the monies of the York Minster were looked after, because the house that we're looking at today there dates from the 17th century and was given to the National Trust in 1930. As we'll see on the bit of a film, there's a plaque in the floor of the wall that says where a Roman road went underneath, and that was when a principal Roman road into this part of the city up here. But around about sort of 1330, when they're sort of rebuilding the bar gates and things like that, is that the Minster didn't want the Roman road coming into their precinct, because they actually have their own police force still today and had at that time. So they rerouted that road, and that road really became Goodrham Gate and into Monk Gate as well. And that's why Monk Bar was built where it is today, not on the site of the Roman bar gate that led into the city where this came under. So that road came under where the treasurer's house is today, and it's said that a man who was repairing that, the Via Decumana in the cellars of the treasurer's house, saw a Roman soldier and some soldiers on that road coming underneath it. And so this section of the wall that we finish at today ends up at Monk Bar. This is the inside of it, which is really the Richard III Museum. He was sort of a well-liked northern king, because he lived in his teenage years up at Middleham Castle, and was Duke of York as well. And because he had the support of York, so that's why he's well liked. And so when his body was found in the Leicester car park, is that they wanted it to be buried at York Minster because of the association with York. And again, in here you can see the Portcullis. Normally best seen from the outside, seen from the Monk Gate side of it, looking towards sort of the Goodrham Gate down here, because this is the tallest of the bar gates. It's 63 feet high, and known as Monk Bar, largely because of the number of sort of monasteries and monastic houses that were in York at the time. So it's no particular one sort of monastery or anything like that, but it's just a standard name after it. And so we see that this was built in 1330, really up to this area up here, the first sort of 3 stages of it. And they were built in 1330, and then the upper stage up here built in the 15th century. It's also, like the other bar gates we'll see, all built of stone, and there's a reason for this, is that it's then fireproof as well. It was also impregnable in a way, because those rooms, like we've seen in that one here, if you got into the lower stage, you had to cross diagonally from here across to the other side to get up the stairwell, the spiral staircase, up to the next room. You then had to go across that diagonally, take that room, come across that diagonally, and then be attacked from above, from the floor above. So you'd actually have to take all these floors before you'd actually taken Monk Bar itself. And as you can see here from the statues on top, which I guess are Victorian, is that they're holding great boulders up there to drop down onto attackers coming in. And again, this had a bar gate coming out in front of this, and this was demolished in 1825. And unlike the one that we've seen at Bootham Bar, this has got the actual doors that led onto the top of the Barbican, as we'll see a warm gate, which I showed slightly earlier, where the tables for the cafe are now. So that's what those two holes are there. They're the doors onto the top of the Barbican, so the entrance tunnel led in, and it would come out to about here as well. The other thing to look at is these two square holes up there. They were for cannons to be pointed out, and the slits above it, that's where the men could take aim at people attacking from the city from this side. So that's what they are. And again, we got the coat of arms of York and a royal coat of arms as well. I think that's a Stuart coat of arms in there. And again, 1825, this was the Barbican was demolished in order to allow larger traffic to come through. So both these gates here on either side, the arches, date from 1825 in order to get the traffic through there as well. And just looking from the other side, this is slightly different as well, because as mentioned at Bootham Bar, is that there tend to be wooden structures behind them. Monk Bar is the only one that's got a solid wall behind it. So it was actually built like this and hasn't changed. Perhaps the windows have been inserted for when it was used as accommodation as well. People lived in this bar gate, and they said that mortgage tax was paid for the repair of the walls themselves. And just a bit further down, coming to the end of this, is that if you look inside here as well, you've got the seats that the tax collectors would sit on. So if you came through here, then you had to declare, if you're a merchant, what you're going to sell into York. I guess they sort of reckoned what the sort of value of it was, and you would pay a tax based on that. I guess that was a mortgage tax, which was used to pay for the upkeep and repair of the wall. No doubt it was used for other things as well, knowing these types of things. And so that's what that was for. And again, these gates were closed at night, roughly probably from about 9 p.m. and reopened sometime early in the morning, probably I guess at 6 in the morning or something like that. But like I say, we'll look at the gates as well when we get to Warmgate Bar. But like I say, that's sort of the thing they were doing. So I've got a bit of film here, which I'm going to show. This section of the wall is the only remaining piece of the Roman wall that was incorporated into the city's medieval walls, and includes a 10-sided Multangular Tower. This was the west corner of the Roman fortress. The base is Roman and stands 17 feet or 5 metres high. Above that, a further 11 feet or 3 metres or so was added in the 13th century. The red tiles have been used to level the wall. You can see the interior of the tower from the library side. If you follow the wall around behind the library, you can see a rare stone-built tower dating from the Anglian period, the 8th century. They didn't often build in stone, perhaps why it's so small. And further along, an embankment that shows how the wall was built up over the centuries. These buildings here belong to university today, and there's also a path a shortcut to the museum gardens behind. Look for the very ornate coat of arms above the door straight ahead. This property was built in the late 15th century as a house for the Abbot of St Mary's Abbey that's immediately behind. Today it's known as the King's Manor, and this is where the Council of the North met. This was the King's government in the north that met between 1536 and 1641. The royal coat of arms is that of Charles I. In 1642, civil war broke out in England between supporters of Charles I, the Cavaliers, who believed the king ruled the country completely, and that of the parliamentarians, the Roundheads, who believed that government had power over the king. Charles was beheaded in 1648, and the country was governed by Oliver Cromwell, but on his death, Charles I's son, Charles II, was invited back to the throne in 1660. Now cross back over the road to Bootham Bar. The white painted building, the de Grey rooms, were built in 1842 for the officers of the Yorkshire Hussars, who used it for dances and meetings. It's now used as rehearsal space for the Theatre Royal on the far side. From here we can take some steep steps onto the wall and follow this around to Monk Bar. Follows on the inside Dean's Park behind the Minster, and on the outside two roads, Gillygate and Lord Mayor's Walk. Just as a warning, the steps down from Monk Bar are even steeper than those going up, and also along the wall there are various steps up and down too. The steep steps were added for visitors to get up onto the wall, which are open during daylight hours only. It is the only entrance gate that is free to pass through. Here you can see the Portcullis that was an added level of protection. It would have been dropped in front of the gates every night and during times of warfare. You are now on one of the oldest stretches of a wall. This follows the line of the original Roman wall. It has been built and rebuilt many times, the last time in the medieval period. It stretches about 3 miles or 5 kilometres. It never circled the whole city, as part was waterlogged by the river Foss and impassable until it was drained in the 17th century. The Roman wall enclosed 50 acres or 20 hectares, whilst the medieval wall encloses 263 acres or 106 hectares. To the right, we look over the buildings in Dean's Park. The Archbishop of York, a post created in 735, 109 years after the founding of the Minster, he had his palace here, and some of the arcades belonged to that. But in 1241, the then Archbishop, Walter de Grey, who had the Minster built as we see it today, decided to move the palace to Bishopthorpe, 3 miles away, where it remains today. The palace was demolished in the 18th century, just leaving the chapel. Since 1810, it has been the Minster's library. At the corner tower, the road below is Lord Mayor's Walk. Here you can see where the moat was. It was created by diverting waters of the river Foss along it. The plaque inset in the pavement shows the extent of a Roman wall where a road passed under. To the right, we are now behind the Treasurer's house in Dean's Park, and, as its name implies, was where the finances of a church were looked after.
The house today is a late 17th century building and became a private house around 1800. It has been looked after by the National Trust since 1930. Its cellars cover the Roman road, the Via Decumana, and a worker here in the 19th century saw a Roman soldier on horseback, followed by soldiers pass along the former road. This part of the wall ends at Monk Bar, the northern gate into the city. It houses the Richard III Museum. Richard III ruled for just 2 years, as he was killed at the Battle of Bosworth on the 22nd of August 1485, beaten by Henry VII, the very first of the Tudor kings. He was brought up at Middleham Castle, 45 miles away to the north, and relied upon York for his support. His body was found in a council car park at Leicester in 2012, and now interred in the cathedral there.
Whilst you're there, it might be just worth walking down Monkgate, the road that leads out from underneath the tower. Just a bit down here on the right-hand side, there's this property here, which has got a blue plaque on there, because that's where George Hudson, the railway king, the man responsible for bringing the railway to York during the sort of 1830s and rerouting all the lines on the east side of the country to run through York, because he was fell from grace in 1849, but he lived in this property here in the sort of late 1820s into the early 1830s. So that's where one of the properties that he lived in around here and other places as well. So that's just further off where Monk Bar is. It's about down there on this map where George Hudson's house is. So now we're going to follow another piece of the Roman of the wall. Partly the Roman wall ends about here, and we can see the sort of a corner tower of that. So you can see how it came down here to about here and then came across. So that was sort of the extent of it. And because there's not as much to see on this side of the wall that we're going around. And then you can see, but it's fairly straight until here. And that's where the Roman wall ended. And we can see how it then wiggles around, but it never did before now. When we're looking over here, how straight that wall is. You can say this is when the wall was built later, really by the Normans. And it wiggles here a bit because there's the church of St. Cuthbert here that still is there today. And that was mentioned in the Domesday Book. So that's probably why it came round the back of it. And when we get to the Layerthorpe bridge here, that was when the King's Pool was along here. So I'm going to stop there. Then there was a large postern tower there, which is as large as one of the bar gates as well, because that was being demolished. So let's have a quick look along here. Once you get up onto the walls, like I say, I've shown the piece of video at the end. It's about 4 minutes long. This one is. If you look, as soon as you come up the steps and look over to the left-hand side, there's a pub down there at the bottom, just beyond the bar gate, called the Keystones. And this is where this ice house is in it, because they built around 1800. Because they'd put ice in there in the winter, put straw to keep it cold throughout the summer months as well, then restock it. So that's one of the things you can see from the wall. And then really on the other side, we can see the Merchant Tailors Hall, because this was a sort of a trader station, as its name says, for tailors. Because they rather like the other hall, the Merchant Adventurers Hall there, is that it had a religious side to it. So this was the Guild of St. John the Baptist. And because if you're a tailor, you'd have come here to do your business. They oversaw the apprentices and the quality of the cloth to make sure that it was the right length and the right width and all those other types of things. Unfortunately, it's wood on the inside, but then was encased in brick in the 17th century, 18th century. So it doesn't look as old as the Merchant Adventurers Hall does on Foss Gate, because it was a large guild as well. In 1386, it had 128 master tailors in here as well. And because it can be visited, probably not at the moment, but they normally open it up to visitors once or twice a year, and it's free to go in to have a look around. You can see the wall exactly behind us here running along there. And this is where, just beyond the by the by the Master Tailor's Hall, is that you can see where they've dug out the Roman tower here. Again, a corner tower here where it then went further down there. So that's what you can see from there. There's a plaque on the side of there to show what that is. And then coming down to look at some other towers down here. Like I said, it wiggles a bit and then suddenly turns away from it, because behind here we've got St Cuthbert's Church. This is called the New Tower, although it was built in 1380. I say it was probably a lot lower than it was. And I say a lot of this along here was rebuilt by the Victorians, and so the arrow slits and the gun emplacements aren't quite true with what it should be. So they've actually rebuilt really the battlements along here, so they don't really look like they used to. And then coming to the Church of St Cuthbert, we'll see from the bit of film some gardens behind it. That's the gardens to St Anthony's Hall. Again, that was another guild, and the hall was built in 1446. The gardens you see on the piece of film, you can actually go in and visit because there's like an art gallery in there, and I think there's another shop as well. St Anthony's Hall houses a collection of a quilt museum. Although it's no longer open, I think it opens a few times a year to show their collection off. So you need to check on their website when that does. And part of it is, I think, Trinity Church is in the main body of that hall as well. So St Cuthbert's, this church here, where the reason why the wall goes round behind it, sits at Peasholme Green, because this takes its name from where peas were grown here in the sort of water meadows around here. So we're just coming really behind St Cuthbert's to where the wall comes to an end before the King's Pool, that marshland, started. So there's a church here already, and in the Domesday Book, the first rector was recorded in 1239, although the church that you see today dates from 1430. It's not in use today. It belongs to the parish. There's a parish centre to St Michael the Belfry, the church next to York Minster, with that small belfry tower on top of it. So it's not generally open. It's divided up into meeting rooms and other things like that inside. Because it's dedicated to St Cuthbert. Why it would have been there in the Domesday Book is because St Cuthbert, he was a monk at Lindisfarne. He died in 875. The Vikings attacked Lindisfarne, but they didn't want him to take the relics of St Cuthbert, so he went on this long journey around Yorkshire for 7 years. And so where his body lay is normally a church of St Cuthbert. So I've seen them before in my talks we've done. There's a St Cuthbert church at Fishlake. That's the one that's been in the news last year for when the Fishlake was flooded. And at Ackworth, there's a St Cuthbert's church there as well. And there's various other ones. So his body sort of went on this northern tour before going back to Lindisfarne when it's thought safe to. And then the road behind, I'm showing you this because you can see the line of the wall coming along here straight. And when we get to the new tower down here, it veers off more to the right. This area, as it says down here, is called Dewberry, largely because this is where the Jewish population lived at the time. And it's thought, or there is a Jewish cemetery under the car park of Sainsbury's. So those bodies were disinterred for when the Sainsbury's development took place and interred elsewhere. The Jews had a difficult time in York and probably in other cities as well. On the 16th, 17th of March, 1190, 150 of them were massacred in Clifford's Tower. They were accused of profiteering on loans from those going on holy crusades. And they went in there for protection and decided they couldn't get out and actually set light to the tower itself, and they burned to death. In 1290, they were outlawed from the city, and because the Jewish population didn't really return for the next 500 years. And we see as we come down here, the wall steps down. We go through, first pass through a sort of tower and then down to another tower, which leads on to where the River Foss comes in here. So the last tower that we see on the bit of film wasn't the actual last postern tower. Where I'm stood on taking this photograph from, that's the River Foss. That's the river that rises up in the sort of Howardian Hills. It's quite a short river, it's 19 miles, but it's on account of this is that there wasn't any wall built around here. It probably would have come down the side, but like I say, the River Foss as it is today was canalised in 1731 sorry, 1798, all the way to Strensall in order to carry goods around within their sort of agricultural goods from the Howardian Hills. And we'll say next time we'll see just a bit further along here some of the large warehouses that Rowntree's built as well for the storage of cocoa that could come up here to be brought to their works. That tower there, that's a Victorian one. It was for a waste incinerator. And there's always been a landmark. That's why it hasn't been demolished. But really, so the River Foss didn't look like this. It was a sort of a big marshland round here, but it flowed through. And really the reason why the wall wasn't built along here, as I mentioned at the beginning, 1090 or sometime after that, it was dammed to create a fishing pond. And but then it gradually started to dry out again because of the works they were doing on the River Foss. In 1644, Black Tom Fairfax's parliamentarian troops thought of crossing it. They thought it was dry enough for their troops to actually just walk into the city from this area, but they were worried that carrying the equipment that they had is that they would suddenly become very marshy and boggy as they went along, and they couldn't take their cannons or anything like that in with them, so they decided against it, and that's why it sort of gradually dried out. Citizens of York were asked to throw their rubbish into here because as it became more canalised, then it formed islands within it. And that's why the road coming alongside here is called Foss Islands Road, largely because of that. And that's what they were doing. They were asked to throw the rubbish into the thing to join the islands together in order to canalise the river as we see it today coming along here. So I'll just show you the bit of film on here, going from the side of Monk Bar all the way down to Layerthorpe Bridge. And like I said, there was a postern tower down there, and that was demolished in 1829, and you see drawings of that. It was a very large one, big enough to be considered a bar gate. It also had later on a drawbridge put across it, because when the River Foss came more canalised, is then that drawbridge could be lowered and people could cross across the river at that time, because it was all demolished in 1829, and then there's a concrete bridge there today, because it's probably an unpretty part of the city. So let's have a look at this 4 minutes of film just coming from Monk Bar down to the River Foss. So I'll be picking up on this again on Monday, looking from this area, probably round to Fishergate, probably round to the castle, and then I'll do a third one, which will then look at the south part of the from the river, going around the sort of the more industrial area for the houses that are built for the railway workers, Micklegate Bar, the Bar Convent, and the railway station. There's a cholera graveyard round there as well. So because we'll be dividing that into three, so it is again very much on the same thing format as today.